he was willing to go whatever I could do to make that film. So that's how it all started, with him coming off of...
Martin Scorsese is a name spoken with reverence in Hollywood. He turned criminals into legends. He transformed violence into poetry. And he built masterpieces like Taxi Driver, Goodfellas, The Departed, and The Wolf of Wall Street with absolute control. But behind that genius, what's behind the calm voice and quiet authority, there is a side of Martin Scorsese very few people talk about. A side that walked out of rooms, that cut actors out of projects without hesitation, that permanently closed doors on some of the biggest stars in Hollywood. And here's the shocking truth. These weren't unknown actors, they weren't amateurs, they were A-list celebrities. Some mocked his methods, some challenged his authority, and one actor pushed him so far that the Scorsese walked out of his own workshop and never looked back. This is the untold story of the actors Martin Scorsese refused to work with again. And it all begins with the man who made Scorsese lose patience completely. Jim Carrey is not the first name people associate with Martin Scorsese. But behind closed doors, insiders remember him as the actor who tested Scorsese's patience more than anyone else. Their brief and explosive encounter happened in 1999, during the early development phase of Scorsese's original Howard Hughes project. At that time, Carrey was riding the peak of his fame, unfiltered, unpredictable, explosive with energy. He entered the workshop exactly the way the world expected Jim Carrey to enter any room. But Scorsese's world is different. It is built on precision, on rhythm, on silence, on control, and Jim Carrey did not believe in silence. Within minutes, Carrey was standing on a chair, twisting his body to mimic Howard Hughes' physical deterioration. Then, suddenly, without warning, he dropped to the floor. He crawled under Scorsese's desk, acting out Hughes' paranoia phase in a manic burst of performance. The room froze. No laughter, no reactions, just tension. Scorsese's jaw tightened. His fingers tapped the table in a fast, irritated rhythm. Later, legendary production designer Dante Ferretti would recall that moment clearly. Jim was performing for himself. Martin wasn't watching a character, he was watching chaos. For Scorsese, this wasn't bold creativity, it was a violation of everything he believed filmmaking should be. The breaking point came when Carrey improvised 5 different versions of the same monologue, changing the tone every single time. Scorsese finally leaned back in his chair. His eyes went cold, and in a quiet but unmistakable voice, he said, "Stick to the script, Jim." Carrey smiled, confident, unbothered. "But that's not how genius works," he replied. That was it. Scorsese stood up, he walked out of the room, and he didn't return for 15 minutes. The message was clear. To Scorsese, Carrey's creativity wasn't brilliance. It was insubordination. Behind closed doors, Scorsese later told his producer a sentence that sealed Jim Carrey's fate in his world. "If I let him loose in my film, I'll lose control of the film." The project was reworked. Carrey's name was erased from every document, and Martin Scorsese never spoke about him publicly again. Second on this list is not just another famous name. She's the biggest superstar Martin Scorsese ever turned his back on, Julia Roberts. And the most shocking part, their fallout didn't happen during a screaming match. It didn't happen during a heated argument on set. It began with a laugh. They were preparing for the age of innocence. Scorsese had demanded absolute historical accuracy. The costume team spent days preparing authentic 1870s corsetry. Stiff, brutally tight, unforgiving, exactly the kind of physical discomfort Scorsese believed would force actors to inhabit their character's reality. Julia walked into the fitting room, picked one up, ran her fingers along the boning, and smirked. "So this is what you want me to suffer in?" she joked, loud enough for everyone to hear. No one laughed. Scorsese watched her hands casually pulling at the corset strings, as if she were inspecting a Halloween costume rather than a critical piece of character construction. When the tailor began tightening it, Julia winced. Then she yanked it loose. "This isn't acting," she muttered. "This is torture." That was the first crack. Scorsese stepped closer, calm, controlled, but visibly irritated. Actors of that era lived inside this discomfort, he explained. It shaped how they moved, breathed, and existed. Julia shrugged. "Well, I'm not spending months gasping for air just to walk across a room." From that moment, tension followed them everywhere. During a rehearsal, Julia suddenly stopped mid-scene. She shook her head. "People don't talk like this," she said. "Nobody talks like this." Then she turned directly toward Scorsese, waiting for him to disagree. And he did. Without raising his voice, he answered, "They did. You just don't want to." That single sentence changed everything. Minutes later, Julia's team pulled her aside. Within days, she stepped away from the film quietly, without any public explanation. But insiders remember Scorsese's reaction after she left. He closed her file, placed it at the bottom of the stack, and said, almost under his breath, "She's not coming back, not for anything I make." To this day, Julia Roberts remains the most famous actor Martin Scorsese ever rejected before the camera even rolled. What happens when raw temper collides with absolute control? You get one of the ugliest behind-the-scenes explosions in Martin Scorsese's career, Mark Wahlberg. Their conflict didn't simmer quietly. It didn't grow over months. It detonated. On day 3 of filming The Departed, they were shooting one of Dignam's legendary insult-filled scenes. The energy on set was already tense. The language was sharp. The pace relentless. After a take, Scorsese approached Wahlberg quietly, not to criticize, not to humiliate, just to adjust the tone. Mark wiped the sweat from his forehead, locked eyes with Scorsese, and fired the first shot. "Stop policing my performance," he said. "You hired me to be real. Let me be real." This wasn't simple pushback. It was an accusation. Wahlberg was implying that the Scorsese didn't understand authenticity. For a director whose entire career was built on living inside the emotional reality of his characters, that sentence cut deep. The set went silent. Scorsese froze. Then, after a long pause, he delivered a line that destroyed any chance of peace between them. "Real doesn't mean uncontrollable," he said. "If you can't adjust, you don't belong in my films." The meaning was unmistakable. Wahlberg was talented, but in Scorsese's eyes, he lacked discipline. Mark's face dropped. From that moment on, he played every scene like he was proving something, not to the audience, but to Scorsese. For Scorsese, this wasn't correction, it was rejection. After that exchange, their relationship was finished. They spoke only when absolutely necessary. There were no friendly conversations, no shared laughs, no private praise. And when Wahlberg's name came up years later for Shutter Island or The Wolf of Wall Street, Scorsese reportedly gave the same answer every time. He's not coming back. Winona Ryder is fourth on this list, and strangely, her conflict with Martin Scorsese didn't explode. It sliced. There were no raised voices, no slammed doors, no public confrontation, but the damage it caused was permanent. Their tension grew quietly during the Age of Innocence, becoming one of the most uncomfortable working relationships Scorsese ever endured. The breaking moment came during a late evening shoot inside the Van der Luyden mansion set. The room was fully lit. The crew was waiting. The camera had stopped again. Scorsese wanted something very specific from Winona's character, May Welland. Something subtle, something sharp. He stepped beside her and spoke carefully. May isn't as innocent as she looks, he said. Let the audience feel her choice. Winona listened. She held her script against her chest. She nodded slowly. Then she replied with a sentence that stunned everyone within earshot. I won't turn her into a villain because you want more edge. This wasn't hesitation. It was a declaration. She was telling Scorsese that his interpretation of the character was wrong. For a director who builds every frame around emotional precision, it felt like a direct challenge to his identity. Scorsese tried once more, firmer this time. Her strength is hidden, he said. Don't play her like a child. Winona didn't back down. Her strength is dignity, she replied, not calculation. I'm not changing that. That sentence ended everything. Scorsese stepped back. He folded his arms, and he didn't say another word to her until the cameras rolled. He didn't yell, he didn't argue, but his silence was harsher than any confrontation. From that day forward, communication between them became cold and transactional. Winona still delivered a performance that earned her an Academy Award nomination. But once filming wrapped, Martin Scorsese never mentioned her name again. He never invited her back, never reopened the door, never offered a second chance, and that silence lasted for decades. James Caan is the fifth name on this list, and unlike the others, his clash with Martin Scorsese didn't happen on set. It happened before a single frame was ever shot. Their conflict unfolded in a small pre-production office in the mid-1970s during early discussions for a gritty Little Italy character study Scorsese was developing. Caan arrived confident, too confident. He was riding the unstoppable success of The Godfather. His career was on fire, and he knew it. He paced the room, flipped through the script like it was a magazine, talked fast, laughed louder than necessary. Scorsese sat across from him, quiet, observant, already irritated by the swagger. Then it happened. Caan tossed the script onto the table. Nobody from New York talks like this, he said casually. Let me fix it so it sounds like a real man. The room changed instantly. This wasn't just feedback. It was James Caan telling Martin Scorsese, a man who grew up on those exact streets, that he didn't understand his own world. Scorsese's expression went completely blank. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, voice calm but razor sharp. I don't need you to rewrite my city, he said. I need you to play it. That second sentence ended everything. Caan had questioned Scorsese's authenticity. Scorsese had questioned Caan's professionalism. The meeting unraveled within minutes. By the end of the week, the project didn't stall. It collapsed, not postponed, not delayed, destroyed. Insiders later said both men stopped returning each other's calls. For the next 30 years, they kept a careful, polite distance. There was an unspoken understanding between them. One room wasn't big enough for both. After hearing all these stories, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. Martin Scorsese never rejected actors because they lacked talent. Every name on this list was brilliant, acclaimed, powerful. What he rejected was something else entirely: disrespect for process, disregard for discipline, and the belief that the star power mattered more than the film itself. Jim Carrey brought chaos where Scorsese demanded control. Julia Roberts questioned physical authenticity before the story even began. Mark Wahlberg challenged authority in the middle of production. Winona Ryder refused to bend her interpretation even when asked quietly. James Caan tried to rewrite a world Scorsese had lived his entire life. Different personalities, different moments, but the same outcome. Once Scorsese felt his vision was being threatened, the door closed forever. No second chances, no public feuds, no dramatic announcements, just silence. And that silence may be the most powerful statement of all, because Martin Scorsese doesn't need to shout. He doesn't need to argue. He simply moves on. So now the real question is this: which actor shocked you the most? And who do you think truly deserved a second chance? Tell me in the comments. And if you want more untold Hollywood stories like this, the conflicts, the egos, the moments that changed film history forever, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because the next story might surprise you even more.